The dust hung in the air like a veil between the living and the dying. Somewhere beneath that ochre curtain, 12 Navy SEALs were pinned down in a compound that wasn't supposed to exist, fighting an enemy that wasn't supposed to be there. The radio chatter had gone from tactical precision to something rawer, more desperate. Call signs were replaced with first names. Ammunition counts were no longer whispered, they were shouted. And then, just as Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hendricks pressed his back against the crumbling mud wall and accepted that this might be where his war ended, the firing stopped. Not from his side, from everywhere. The Taliban fighters who had been advancing with the confidence of men who knew they had won simply froze. Some dropped to their knees. Others looked up. Hendricks didn't understand it. His team didn't understand it. But they sure as hell weren't going to waste it. The sound came next. Low, guttural, like the earth itself was growling. It wasn't the high whine of an F-16 or the distant rumble of a bomber at altitude. This was close, intimate, predatory. The kind of sound that rattled your chest and made your teeth ache. Hendricks risked a glance over the wall, and that's when he saw it. A shape emerging from the dust cloud, slow and deliberate, like a prehistoric creature rising from primordial fog. The A-10 Thunderbolt II came in low enough that he could see the panels on its belly, low enough that the roar of its twin turbofans seemed to compress the very air. Ugly didn't begin to describe it. The A-10 wasn't built for aesthetics. It was built around a gun, the GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds the size of milk bottles at 70 rounds per second. The aircraft wasn't graceful. It was blunt, gray, battle-scarred, with a cockpit that sat in a titanium bathtub because the designers knew this plane would get shot. Often. But what made Hendricks stop breathing wasn't the plane, it was the way it moved. There was a deliberateness to its flight path, a kind of patience that seemed impossible for something made of metal and explosives. The A-10 didn't just fly over the battlefield, it prowled. The Taliban knew what was coming. That's why they'd stopped firing. That's why some of them were running. But there was nowhere to run from this. Hendricks watched the aircraft bank slightly, adjusting, hunting. And then he heard her voice on the radio, calm, almost gentle. Ax-21, Viper 1-3, I've got eyes on your position. Stay low, this won't take long. The voice had a drawl to it, southern maybe, the kind that turned syllables into something soft, but there was steel underneath. Hendricks keyed his radio with a hand that had started shaking. Viper 1-3, Ax-21, whoever you are, you just became my favorite person on Earth. There was a pause, then, copy that, Ax, now let me work. The A-10 climbed slightly, gained maybe 200 feet, then pivoted with a grace that seemed to mock its brutish appearance. Hendricks saw the nose dip. He knew what was coming. Everyone knew what was coming. The GAU-8 didn't sound like a machine gun. It sounded like fabric tearing, like reality itself was being ripped in half. BRRRRRRRRRT. The sound arrived after the destruction, a peculiarity of physics that made the A-10's gun run feel biblical. Where there had been a cluster of fighters advancing on the western wall, there was now just dust and silence. The rounds didn't just kill, they erased. The limestone compounds didn't crumble, they vaporized. Hendricks watched the A-10 pull up, circle, and come around again. There was no rush, no panic, just methodical, terrifying efficiency. Ax-21, I'm seeing movement southeast, approximately 200 meters from your position. Possible technical with a mounted weapon. Confirm. Hendricks scrambled for his binoculars. Through the haze, he could just make out the shape, a Toyota pickup with what looked like a DSHK heavy machine gun welded to the bed. It was already pivoting toward them. Confirmed, Viper, that's a threat. Copy, engaging. The A-10 didn't bother with a gun run this time. Hendricks saw something drop from beneath the wing, small, almost casual. The AGM-65 Maverick missile had a mind of its own. It curved through the air like it was following a wire, and when it hit the technical, the explosion was so bright that Hendricks had to look away. When he looked back, there was just a crater and burning metal. The A-10 was already circling again, patient, watchful, like a guardian that had all the time in the world. Ax-21, I've got playtime for another 12 mics. Anyone else need erasing, or should I just loiter and look pretty? There was humor in the voice now. Hendricks found himself laughing despite everything. Viper 1-3, you maintain that orbit. We're gonna need a few minutes to remember how to breathe. Copy that, Axe. I'll be your eye in the sky. Nobody's getting near you. That's a promise. And she meant it. For the next 12 minutes, the A-10 circled overhead like a mechanical angel, and not a single round was fired at Hendricks' team. The Taliban fighters who hadn't been destroyed had melted back into the mountains, gone like ghosts. When the extraction birds finally arrived, two Blackhawks flying nap of the earth, the A-10 escorted them in, then peeled off with a wing waggle that felt almost playful. Hendricks watched it disappear into the haze and realized he didn't even know her name. Just a call sign. Viper 1-3. But call signs didn't come from nowhere. They were earned, branded, sometimes burned into you by moments that defined who you were in the cockpit. As the Black Hawk lifted off and Hendricks finally allowed himself to relax, he made a mental note. Find out who Viper 1-3 was. Buy her a drink. Maybe a dozen drinks. Maybe name his first kid after her. Because she'd done something that day that went beyond tactics or training. She'd reminded him that sometimes, in the darkest moments, salvation came in the ugliest packages, and it sounded like thunder. Back at Bagram airfield, the A-10 touched down with the kind of landing that made crew chiefs wince, functional, graceful, but hard enough to remind everyone that this aircraft was built for war, not air shows. The canopy popped open, and Captain Renata Viper Kosmeka climbed out with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who'd been in the seat for 4 hours straight. She was 31, compact, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had mostly given up. Her flight suit was stained with sweat, her face marked with the red lines that oxygen masks always left. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. That was exactly how she preferred it. The crew chief jogged up, grinning. "Ma'am, I'm hearing chatter you made some people very happy today." Renata shrugged as she pulled off her gloves. "Did my job, Sergeant. Plane did the rest." "That's not what the SEALs are saying. Word is they're gonna put you in for a medal." Renata's expression didn't change. "They can put me in for a hot shower and 8 hours of sleep. That'd be more useful." But the crew chief wasn't wrong. By nightfall, the story had spread through Bagram like wildfire. The SEALs who'd been pulled out of that compound had talked, and they'd talked with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or snipers. The pilot who saved us was a woman, flew that hog like it was part of her, didn't rush, didn't miss, just worked. There were others who heard the story differently. In the ready rooms and chow halls, among pilots who flew faster jets and prettier missions, the reaction was more complicated. "They're making a big deal out of a danger-close CAS run," said one F-16 pilot, a major with more flight hours than judgment. "It's what A-10s do. It's not exactly shooting down MiGs." His wingman smirked. "Plus, SEALs get excited about everything. Remember when they tried to give that Apache pilot a Silver Star for, what was it? Flying in bad weather." They laughed, but neither of them had been there. Neither of them had seen what Hendricks saw, that impossible calm, that predatory patience. Neither of them understood that the difference between a good CAS pilot and a great one wasn't speed or firepower. It was judgment. And Renata Kosmeka had judgment that bordered on precognition. She'd grown up in rural Montana, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away and self-reliance wasn't a philosophy, it was survival. Her father had been a smoke jumper, one of those lunatics who parachuted into forest fires. Her mother had been a bush pilot, flying supply runs to mining camps in weather that would ground commercial airlines. Renata had soloed at 16, gotten her commercial license at 18, and joined the Air Force at 20 because, as she'd told the recruiter, "I'm tired of flying Cessnas. Show me something with teeth." They'd shown her the A-10, and she'd fallen in love. It wasn't a love that made sense to most people. The Warthog was old when she started flying it, a relic of Cold War thinking, designed to destroy Soviet tanks on the plains of Europe. It was slow, barely broke 400 knots even when diving. It was ugly, looked like something a committee designed after everyone involved had given up. It was loud, uncomfortable, and had a turning radius that made cargo planes jealous. But it was honest. The A-10 didn't lie to you. It didn't promise speed or stealth or glamour. It promised that if you pointed it at the enemy and pressed the trigger, something would die, and in return it would bring you home. Maybe shot up, maybe trailing smoke, maybe with half its tail missing, but home. Renata respected that honesty. She understood it on a level that went beyond flying. In the cockpit, there were no politics, no gender dynamics, no questions about whether she belonged. There was just the mission, the enemy, and the men on the ground who needed her. Everything else was noise. But noise had a way of finding you anyway. The next morning, she was summoned to the squadron commander's office. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Draven was a career officer who'd flown F-15s before transitioning to a staff position, the kind of move that signaled you'd gone as far as your talent would take you. He gestured for Renata to sit. She stayed standing. "Captain Kosmatka, hell of a mission yesterday." "Thank you, sir. The SEALs are singing your praises. JSOC wants a debrief." "Might even be some medal talk." Renata's face remained neutral. "I'd prefer to avoid the medal talk, sir. Just let me fly." Draven leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know, most pilots would kill for this kind of recognition." "Most pilots aren't flying the hog, sir." He almost smiled. "You really love that ugly bastard, don't you? It's the best aircraft in the inventory for the mission, sir, bar none." The F-35 guys would disagree. "The F-35 guys can't do close air support at 200 feet in a sandstorm, sir. And they sure as hell can't loiter for an hour waiting for targets to show themselves." Draven nodded slowly. He'd heard this argument before from every A-10 pilot who'd ever graced his office. They were a cult, the hog drivers, fiercely loyal to an aircraft the Air Force had been trying to retire for 20 years. "Fair point," he said finally. "But here's the reality, Captain. The Air Force is looking for heroes, good optics. You're a female pilot who just saved a SEAL team in spectacular fashion. That's valuable." Renata's jaw tightened slightly. "Respectfully, sir, I didn't do it for optics." "I know that, but the optics exist whether you want them or not, and right now they're working in your favor. Don't fight it." She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Draven was right, and they both knew it. The Air Force needed stories, needed wins, needed something to put in the press releases that made the war look winnable, and she just handed them a perfect one. "Dismissed, Captain, and good work." "Seriously." Renata saluted and left. Outside, the sun was already brutal, turning the flight line into a shimmering mirage. Somewhere out there, another team was probably pinned down. Another situation was probably going sideways. And somewhere, another A-10 pilot was spooling up their engines, running through pre-flight checks, preparing to fly into hell because that's what the job required. Renata walked toward her plane, tail number 328, unofficially known as the Widowmaker because of an unfortunate maintenance history, and felt something close to peace. The crew chief had already done the walk-around. The GAU-8 was loaded. The Mavericks were hung. The Hog was ready, so was she. "Ma'am," she turned. One of the younger pilots, a first lieutenant fresh from training, jogged up. "I just wanted to say, what you did yesterday, that was incredible, like textbook, better than textbook." Renata nodded once. "Thanks, Lieutenant, but remember the textbook gets you halfway there. The rest is just staying calm and trusting your jet." "Yes, ma'am, I hope I can fly like that someday." Renata almost told him the truth. That flying like that meant you'd seen enough bad days to know what real fear looked like, that it meant you'd been scared enough times that you'd learned to operate through it. But he'd figure that out himself, or he wouldn't. Keep studying, keep flying, keep listening to the guys on the ground. They'll teach you more than any instructor. "Yes, ma'am," he hesitated. "Can I ask, how'd you get the call sign Viper?" Renata smiled slightly, a rare thing. "That's a story for another time, Lieutenant. Right now, I've got a brief to attend." She walked away before he could press further. The truth was, she didn't particularly like telling the story. It made her sound either reckless or lucky, depending on who was listening. The call sign had come during her first deployment 3 years ago in a different desert against a different enemy. She'd been flying close support for an army patrol when they'd stumbled into an ambush, a textbook L-shaped kill zone with interlocking fields of fire. The patrol leader, a staff sergeant with the calm of someone who'd seen too much, had called for immediate suppression. But there was a problem. The enemy was dug in less than 100 meters from friendly forces, danger close by any standard, suicidally close by most. Renata had asked for smoke to mark friendly positions. The sergeant had replied that they didn't have smoke, didn't have time, didn't have anything except hope and a grid coordinate that might be off by 50 meters. Any other pilot would have refused, should have refused. The risk of fratricide was too high. But Renata had heard something in the sergeant's voice, not panic but resignation. The sound of a man saying goodbye. She'd come in low, lower than she'd ever flown in combat, low enough that she could see individual faces looking up at her. She'd used the gun short, controlled bursts, walking the round so close to the friendly position that the soldiers later said they felt the heat. The enemy position evaporated. The ambush collapsed. The patrol walked away with 0 casualties. When she landed, her squadron commander had been waiting. He'd been furious, called it showboating, called it a violation of every safety protocol. And then the patrol sergeant had called the squadron directly, demanded to speak to the pilot, and told anyone who'd listened that she'd struck like a viper, fast, precise, and exactly where it counted. The call sign stuck. The reprimand quietly disappeared, and Renata learned that sometimes the rules existed to be broken, as long as you were willing to own the consequences. She thought about that as she walked into the briefing room, where a dozen other pilots were already gathered. The mission brief was routine: assigned airspace, potential targets, communications protocols. But there was an undercurrent of something else, a tension that Renata recognized immediately. Captain Jake Torch Vance, an F-16 pilot with movie star looks and an ego to match, leaned back in his chair and caught her eye. "Hey, Viper, heard you had some fun yesterday. Did my job, Torch." Right, danger close gun runs, saving SEALs, very heroic." His tone was light, but there was an edge to it. "Must be nice flying something that slow, gives you time to sightsee." A few pilots chuckled. Renata didn't react. This was standard. The fast jet guys liked to poke at the hog drivers, and the hog drivers liked to remind everyone that speed didn't matter when you were dead. But Torch wasn't done. "I'm just saying, if they'd sent me, I could have dropped JDAMs from 20,000 feet and been done in 5 minutes. Wouldn't even have to get dirty." Now Renata did react. She turned fully toward him, her voice quiet but clear. "You're right, Torch. You could have dropped JDAMs from altitude. And then the SEALs would have waited 20 minutes for bomb damage assessment, another 10 for clearance to move, and in that time they'd have been overrun. So yeah, you would have been done in 5 minutes. They'd have been done in 15. Permanently." The room went silent. Torch's smirk faded. One of the other hog pilots, a captain named Liu, coughed to cover a laugh. The briefing officer, a major who'd been pretending not to listen, cleared his throat. "Captain Kosmeka is correct. Close air support is about timing as much as firepower. Speed to target matters, but so does persistence and precision. Let's move on." The brief continued, but Renata could feel the shift. The fast jet guys weren't mocking anymore. Not openly, anyway. And the hog pilots were sitting a little straighter, a little prouder. This was the eternal divide in the Air Force. The fighters versus the ground pounders, the glory boys versus the mud movers, the pilots who counted kills versus the pilots who counted saves. Renata had never cared about that divide. She'd picked her side the first time she'd heard a ground controller's voice crack with relief when she checked in on station. There was no feeling in the world like that, knowing that someone down there, someone surrounded and outgunned and probably terrified, had just heard your voice and knew they were going to live. That was worth 1,000 Torch Vances and their smug comments. After the brief, she geared up and walked out to the flight line. The heat hit her like a physical force, but she'd long since stopped noticing. Crew Chief Sergeant Malika Torres was waiting by 328, holding a clipboard and wearing a grin. "Morning, ma'am, she's ready to go. Full load, all systems green. Any maintenance issues I should know about?" "Nothing major. Number 1 engine's running a little hot, but it's within parameters. I'd keep an eye on it, but it shouldn't be a problem." Renata nodded, running her hand along the fuselage as she walked the pre-flight. The skin of the A-10 was pitted and scarred, repaired and re-repaired so many times that it looked like a quilt. There were patches over patches, testament to the Hog's ability to absorb damage that would down any other aircraft. She found the ritual of pre-flight soothing, the methodical checking of control surfaces, the inspection of the GAU-8's barrels, the verification of ordnance loads. It was a conversation between her and the jet, a silent acknowledgement that they were about to trust each other with everything. "Ma'am," Tors was watching her with curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "How do you stay so calm? I mean, yesterday you were flying through that shitstorm like you were on a Sunday drive." Renata considered the question. It wasn't the first time someone had asked. "I don't think about what could go wrong," she said finally. "I just think about what needs to happen next. One step, one decision, one maneuver at a time. You start thinking about all the ways you could die, you'll freeze up. But if you just focus on the next thing, the next target, the next radio call." "It's manageable," Tors nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Still, I don't think I could do it." "You're not supposed to, Sergeant. You've got your job, I've got mine. We each do our part and everyone gets home." "Yes, ma'am." Renata climbed up the ladder and settled into the cockpit. The seat conformed to her after thousands of hours, worn in all the right places. She ran through the startup sequence, muscle memory guiding her hands across switches and dials. The twin turbofans spooled up with that distinctive A-10 sound, less a roar than a sustained growl. Tower cleared her for taxi and she rolled toward the runway, the hog's nose gear steering stiff and awkward on the ground. The A-10 was never graceful until it was airborne. Then it became something else, something dangerous. She lined up on the runway, ran through final checks and pushed the throttles forward. The acceleration was ponderous compared to an F-16, but there was a solidity to it, a sense of mass and purpose. At 120 knots she rotated, and the hog lifted into the Afghan sky with the ease of something born to fly low and ugly. Renata banked toward her assigned sector, leveling off at 8,000 feet. Below, the landscape was a study in browns and grays, mountains, valleys, compounds that could be villages or enemy strongholds. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. She checked in with AWACS, received her tasking: orbit a grid square northeast of Kandahar, be prepared to support a Marine patrol conducting a clearing operation. Standard stuff. She settled into the rhythm of the mission. Orbit, scan, listen to the radio chatter. The Marines were professional calm, moving through a cluster of compounds with the caution of men who'd learned that every doorway could hide death. She listened to their communications, building a mental picture of the operation. And then, like it always did, the situation changed. Viper 1-3, Python 2-6. We're taking fire multiple directions. Request immediate close air support. The voice was young, tight with adrenaline. Renata was already banking toward the coordinates before the request was finished. Python 2-6, Viper 1-3. Copy your request. Pushing now. Describe your situation. We're pinned in a compound north side of the village. Enemies in buildings to our east and west, maybe 30 to 50 meters. We need danger close, we need it now. 30 to 50 meters. Jesus. Renata descended, eyes scanning for the village. There, a cluster of structures with visible muzzle flashes coming from at least 3 buildings. And in the center, barely visible, the Marines huddled behind a low wall. Python, Viper, I've got eyes on. Confirm you're in the 2-story compound with the green door. Affirmative, that's us. Copy, stay down. I'm making a gun run on the eastern building. Do not move until I call clear. Understood. Renata lined up, adjusted for wind, and nosed over into a shallow dive. The GAU-8 was already spinning up, barrels rotating, waiting. She put the targeting pipper on the eastern building, a squat structure with rifle barrels protruding from windows, and squeezed the trigger. BRRRRRRT. The sound was deafening even inside the cockpit. The building didn't just take damage, it ceased to exist as a functional structure. Walls collapsed, the roof caved in, dust and debris erupted into a cloud that obscured everything. She pulled up, banked hard, came around for another pass. Python, eastern building is neutralized. Where's the next threat? Western building, 2 windows on the 2nd floor. She didn't waste time confirming, just adjusted her angle, lined up, fired. Another burst, another building reduced to rubble. All threats suppressed, she called. You're clear to move. Viper, you just saved our asses. Thank you, that's the job, Python. Stay safe. She climbed back to altitude, circling, watching. The Marines moved quickly, professionally, extracting from the compound and making for safer ground. No casualties. Mission success. And Renata felt that familiar, quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that she'd done exactly what she was supposed to do. But as she flew back to Bagram, she thought about Torch's comment, about how he could have done it faster, cleaner, from altitude. And she realized something. He was right. He could have dropped bombs and accomplished the same thing, at least on paper, but he wouldn't have seen the Marines' faces, wouldn't have heard the relief in their voices, wouldn't have felt the weight of knowing that his actions, his decisions, had directly translated into lives saved. That was the difference. That was why she flew the Hog, because it wasn't about the kills. It was about the saves, and no fast jet in the world could do it better. That night, after debriefing, after the paperwork, after the forced small talk in the chow hall, Renata found herself standing alone on the flight line, looking up at the stars. Afghanistan had brutal days and beautiful nights. The sky was clear, unpolluted by city lights, and the Milky Way stretched across the darkness like a river. She thought about her father jumping into fires, her mother flying through storms. And she understood finally why they'd done it. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because some people were built to run toward the danger, to be the thing that stood between chaos and those who couldn't protect themselves. She was one of those people. And the A-10, ugly and unloved and perfect, was her tool, her partner, her weapon. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another team on the ground, another chance to prove that the Warthog and the pilots who flew it were still the best answer to the oldest question in war: how do we save them? Renata smiled slightly, turned, and walked back toward her quarters. She had 5 hours to sleep before the next brief, 5 hours to rest before she climbed back into that titanium bathtub and went hunting again. It was enough. It was always enough, because she was Viper, and the sky was waiting.